Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical inner tube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Nick Roman is a longtime host and broadcaster in the Los Angeles area. Currently, he is the anchor for the LA Report podcast, for the multimedia platform LAist, and host of NPR's All Things Considered on KPCC, the public radio station based in Pasadena. Before joining KPCC, Roman served as a producer, anchor, and news director for KLON/KKJZ in Long Beach for 20 years. An avid sports fan, he's done several stories for NPR's Only a Game. He is an alumnus of KUCI, that's the University of California at Irvine's student radio station, where he was a darn good football and basketball player, even if he does say so himself.
Yes, I do.
Welcome once again. Yes, you do. You should. You were. And I was terrible. Nick Roman, welcome back to our wonderful podcast. We are going to talk about baseball. We want to talk to you about how baseball looks halfway through this season. There have been lots of changes, lots of stars, lots of people talk about lots of stuff, and we'd like to know the good, the bad, and the ugly of it for 2024. So, first of all, are you liking the baseball you're seeing?
I am. Let me put some qualifiers on it. I like the fact that Shohei Ohtani is a tremendous baseball hitter. That he hits, baseballs deep into the night.
Spoken like a true Dodger fan.
Well, I think like a true international baseball fan, because it's so amazing to see how well he does and what a great player he is. I like the fact that there are a lot of teams that are kind of competitive. It's sort of bunched up in the middle in the National League. I like the fact that, the Baltimore Orioles have kind of revived their franchise and have more great young players than just about any team you've ever seen. I don't like the fact that the Chicago White Sox are an absolutely miserable ball club. And it's sad for the folks in Chicago, the few that still enjoy watching White Sox baseball. I like the fact that the Cleveland Guardians are like, what? How did these guys get great? You look at that roster and you kind of go through and you go, I don't know this guy. I don't know this guy. I don't know this guy. And then you look at the box score and you go, well, they won again. They won again. They won again. But the one truly bad thing is how many great players are getting hurt and are gone. The Dodgers have gone through that to a great extent, but they have so much depth that they can kind of survive it. The Phillies didn't have it to the great extent, but still they've lost a couple of big stars for an extended period.
Absolutely.
The Braves have been wiped out. They lost their best pitcher and their best hitter in Spencer Strider and in Ronald Acuna. So those are the things mostly that I like and that I don't like, but there's more,
The thing that I like as a Phillies fan is that the Phillies are doing so incredibly well. They've won, 63 games now at the halfway point at the All-Star break. And they managed to survive losing, like you said, Trey Turner and JT Realmuto, and for a very brief time, even Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper. But one of the things that made me smile was at the All-Star game, when it was pretty much an all-Phillies infield. They had Harper at first. They had Turner at shortstop. They had Alec Boehm at third base. And one of the big highlights was when Turner made a really nice play, and all of them were mic'd up, and they were all congratulating one another. That's kind of how this Phillies team has been running. But you're right. There are other surprise teams. The Milwaukee Brewers has surprised me. They lost Corbin Burns to the Orioles, their star pitcher. And they didn't really make any big moves during the offseason, and yet they continue to win, and they continue to hold on first place in that National League Central Division. So, that's a surprise to me.
Oh, yeah. People are already having this conversation, and I know you've heard about it, Nick, where they're looking at two guys who are having remarkable years, who often have remarkable years. One is Ohtani, one is Bryce Harper, and they're already starting to say if both of these guys finish up with comparable stats, do you give it to the guy who's the designated hitter, or do you give it to the guy who has to go field every day? What do you think about that?
If Ohtani was pitching, then you'd give it to Ohtani.
Absolutely.
Because he's not pitching. You might still give it to Ohtani because he's just so tremendous and does things on the baseball field that, at least with a bat in his hand, that so many other people, can't do. But, coin flip. I don't know. Ohtani's won a gazillion of those kind of awards, and Bryce Harper's won a few of himself, and so somebody's going to win it. And I guess they're both lucky that Acuna's hurt because he might have won it anyway. So,
But then again, Acuna goes out, and like you said, the Braves are scrambling. But Marcell Ozuna, who the Braves faithful wanted packed out of the door 2 years ago, is carrying that team right now with his hitting.
Yeah, well, there's some teams that are just smarter about player acquisition, and the managers know what to do better than others. And, the Phillies, the Braves, and the Dodgers, at least in their front offices, really know what they're doing. The Milwaukee Brewers, I don't know, there must be something in that beer because they know they lose really good players, and they still seem to have more coming up all the time. And the same is going on with the Cleveland Guardians. So some teams are just super smart. The Baltimore Orioles finally got smart. It took them a long time, but they finally got smart. And I was listening to an Orioles game, and they were going down the list of players, and I go, "Oh my God, that guy's great! He's What is he? 23? Oh, that guy's great. What is he? 22? Oh,
yeah.
They're going to be good for a long, long time."
Don, of course, has been an Orioles fan forever, and I have to say, the team is great. The crowd is monumental. I mean, there's such cohesion in the crowd, and the park is wonderful. And it just feels like an old time game every time you go to it. Well, we were just at some minor league ballparks recently that weren't that much smaller than Citizens Bank, and it had the same feeling. And that's one of the great stories in baseball is how they have created this cultural party every night over there.
And new ownership too. And that's going to make a difference. It's going to make a real difference for the Orioles. The Angelos family that team had been down for so long. And then right at the tail end, they brought it, they turned it around and hit, it was like going to Vegas and hitting on the roulette table in draft after draft after draft.
Yes.
And you see all those guys now out on the field, Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson and a whole bunch of other guys whose names are not especially well known, but they are great, great players. And they got more coming, too. That's the other thing.
Yeah. One of the things that I was happy to see from the Orioles in the All-Star game was Anthony Santander finally getting a nod, because that's a guy, along with Cedric Mullins in the outfield, that have been there through rough times and are finally now riding a crest of having good fellow players, and are seeing the results of just hanging in there and being decent players.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, that team is loaded. For all the talk you always hear about the Yankees and about the Red Sox, the Orioles, they're the team. I haven't been in that ballpark, by the way, for some years, but the day that I was there, it was a marvel. And there'd been talk about, it's old and we should renovate this, that, and the other thing, and maybe we need a new stadium. No, place is classic.
Exactly. I mean, if they were thinking that way, Boston would have had a glassed-in indoor stadium, by 1960. Really, the Fenway Ballpark is there not because it's comfortable and not because it's convenient to sit in. There's a lot of places in Fenway where you can sit right behind the pesky pole down right field and not see very much. And by the way, listeners, if you ever go to Fenway Park, make sure they don't try to put you down there. All right. Ask where they're putting you, because that's where they'll try to put you. at any rate, yeah, Fenway Park is not there because it's comfortable. It's there because it feels great to be there. And, that's sort of I think Wrigley, I don't know if, has anyone here been into Wrigley? Because I'd love to go there.
Many times. Yeah,
Yes.
many times.
And I think of Wrigley as sort of the same thing. It's sort of it's sort of a glorified bleachers section for like 3/4 of it, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. And I can tell you that the seats were built for the not 21st century bottom. So,
Well, I have sons who live in Chicago and in Baltimore, which is one of the reasons I've gone to so many Orioles games over the last few years. I'll go down and pick up my son and we'll go to an Orioles game. We've been doing that for like 3 or 4 years. So we were there when they lost 100 games and we were there last year when they won 100 games.
yeah.
And I will tell you, the crowd was pretty much the same either time. They were behind that club 100%. And I have been outside Wrigley Field. I have not been in Wrigley Field. I walked around outside it because my son's house or condo is probably about 10 blocks away. So I always make a pilgrimage there. One of these days I'll buy tickets and go inside. But
I hear it's pretty fun.
It is.
well, it looks fun. We do walk around. There's an L station
Yeah.
behind the park up above. And we have gone up there to wait for a train to take us to different places in Chicago. And I kind of look over the L's there, which overlooks a couple of those rooftops that are outside Wrigley Field, where people have converted their rooftops into patios.
Yeah.
And you can buy admission there and kind of watch the game from afar. But you can still get a pretty good view of the field from those.
The first time I ever went to Wrigley was in 1985, and we got. It was actually 2 days after my wedding. Yeah, I know.
Happy honeymoon.
Yeah, well, it kind of
Poor
was.
Mrs. Roman sort of sitting there. Oh, God.
No. She is a huge baseball fan, and she
Yay.
was more than thrilled to go. And we got to the ballpark thinking we could just buy tickets, and there was nothing. And a very kind usher, they called them Andy Frains because that was the company that hired these guys. And, he said, "Oh, you look sad." And we go, "Yeah, well, it's 2 days after our wedding. We want to go to a ball game and we couldn't get in the ballpark." And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out 2 tickets. And he said, "Here you go."
All right.
Oh,
In we
my
went.
Gosh. That
Yeah,
wonderful
we were sitting-
town.
We were sitting down the right field line, and we didn't have those poles in the way. There are places where I've sat there too, where you can't really see, but it was great. We've sat in the bleachers a couple of times. You're talking about that L station. We were taking the train one time to Wrigley, and the train stopped, and it was a super hot day, and those trains are enclosed, and everyone on that train was just sitting there sweating. And I remember a young woman who had it looked like a portfolio case, like she was about to make a presentation, and she had this perfectly starched yellow dress, and her hair was perfect, and her makeup was perfect, and it's so hot, and she's sweating, and I'm thinking, oh my God, she's thinking, I'm going to lose this job because I'm going to look like a mess when I get out of here. And it's silent on the train, and some guy says in the back of the train, he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Chicago Weight Loss Clinic." Everybody started cracking up. Yeah, and we've sat in the bleachers. You take your shirt off and you drink a bunch of beer, and it's tons of fun. It is a good place.
Well, like I said, my son lives near there, and they call the whole area Wrigleyville. So it's pretty nice. I'll tell you another good ballpark before we move on and actually start talking baseball is PNC Park out in Pittsburgh. I've been there a few times. And that is a gorgeous park, and the river's right the other side, and part of the over the outfield wall view that you have is not only downtown Pittsburgh, but this beautiful yellow bridge they've built to connect the ballpark to the downtown, and it's the
Roberto
Clemente
Clemente Bridge.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's beautiful. Beautiful.
You see,
out there.
that's I think that might be the third most beautiful or fourth most beautiful park. It is such a gorgeous park, and they did it right. They brought it into the center of town, which is something that Philly couldn't do. They tried to build the what is now Citizens Bank in the center of Philadelphia, and local interests would not have it. And so they brought it down to that industrialized sports section that they have way, way down in the south of town, which is quite a bit farther away. And really, that feeling of the Pittsburgh Park is the way it really should feel. It's you can hit a ball into the soup, you can hit it into the river. It's tremendous, and it's got one of the greatest, as Don is saying, it's got one of the greatest spectacular skyline views of any ballpark. Really, it shows you that really, if you've not been, folks, this is a really great reason for going to Pittsburgh and for reminding yourself that Pittsburgh isn't the old Pittsburgh. It really is a good-looking town these days.
So let's bring it around to players again. Paul Skeens, what a guy, huh? What a pitcher.
Oh, man.
Do you think the Pirates can actually hold on to him and some of their other budding talent and actually put together a winning team in the next couple of years?
I hope so. I mean, I think they can, and they have to. I mean, that guy is. I think I've seen, because I have the MLB app. I think I've watched almost every one of his starts because it's that amazing, and you're just you're stunned at how good he is, and he's a Southern California kid too, so that's another good reason to watch. He is something else, and their shortstop O'Neill Cruz is another guy who's sort of like, what is this?
Yeah.
They've got more like that too, and Key Brian Hayes over there at third base. The Pirates, 10 years ago, they had a run where it really looked like they were going to, stick a long time in the playoffs, and they didn't do anything at the trading deadline. And I hope that's not their history this time around. I mean, they're under 500 right now, and this might not be the season for them, but soon enough it will be. And they have to do something for those fans because, especially those, the three of us, we remember those great Pirates teams in the 60s and 70s and even all the way into the early 90s that were winners and had stars, just the best players around. And, I remember going to Dodger Stadium many times. It's like, well, who's playing? It's Pirates. Well, we're going. We're going.
Right.
You got to see what Stargell, Clemente. We're going.
Yeah.
So you have to give those fans something more to hang on to than just one player. That player also has to have a team around him that is successful. And I hope you just sort of pray. Every time I watch him pitch, it's like, please elbow hold up. Please elbow hold up. Don't
Definitely.
Don't flame out. Don't do all the stuff that we've seen so many others, have bad stuff happen to them.
Yeah. And living in central Pennsylvania, there's a lot of my friends and neighbors who are from the Pittsburgh area and who remember all those old good Pirates teams. And they've looked at the Pirates over the last 10 years as the minute they get a good player, that player is marked for trade, and they trade him away, and they don't get anything in return for him. Yeah. And then the team just continues to muddle on. And this looks like it's a different team with Skeens and some of the relievers they have, and like you said, O'Neill Cruz.
Brian Reynolds.
They still have some good outfielders out there.
Yeah.
It looks like a team that's on the way the Orioles looked maybe last year or the year before, where suddenly that young talent is coming up and they're figuring out how to play baseball.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key thing is you figure out the game and when to be intense and when to kind of just lay back and have fun. And I think they're probably one team that's on the cusp of that. I think another team that's on the cusp of that is the Red Sox, frankly.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think, yes.
Yeah.
I just saw that Papi on the All-Star Game TV broadcast boldly predicted that the Red Sox would be in the World Series versus the Phillies, which is a pretty bold, and of course, totally free of bias, Yeah, but I wanted to talk about, two things. The first thing is the White Sox. We were talking about Wrigley and how Wrigley's always there. So in a sense, they'll always pack the house. It's a cultural thing. Everybody goes. It's part of being Chicagoan. And a lot of people are White Sox fans too. But, only a handful of years ago, the White Sox were a very formidable team. How do you throw that all down the John so quickly? Because it's all gone. As you said, they are a steaming mess. And is it just incompetence by the front office? I don't get it.
I think it goes above that. Ownership is a problem too, and you see teams with that kind of ownership that I don't know what they're focused on, but they're not focused on hiring. When they hired Tony La Russa a couple seasons ago, my first thought was, well, that's not going to work, and it didn't.
Yeah.
The other thing was that they had these great players who were great at the time. Jose Abreu, who just all of a sudden it just turned around on him. Same with Tim Anderson, who was a batting champion, and now I think a couple of weeks ago he got cut by the Marlins. So and I think Abreu got cut by the Astros too.
I think you're right.
It's a mystery to me. But when your front office misses on draft after draft after draft, and also on trade after trade after trade, and for those of us who also watch the Angels, we know what this is like.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
you have damned yourself to 10 years of not even mediocrity, obscurity, ineptitude, and that's what you're seeing, and it's such a shame. There's another thing I think that this is sort of weird, but it kind of plays into it too. The White Sox built their stadium in 1989, and it looks like a typical, regular kind of ballpark. 4 years later, the Orioles built their stadium, and people went, it's a marvel. It's amazing. 4 years difference from standard kind of thinking to creative and amazing thinking, I think makes a difference, which is sort of an indication of how the White Sox think generally. They are just, they can't seem to grab onto something. And I don't know if they're still living with the Black Sox scandal of more than 100 years ago or what it is, but something is definitely wrong.
Yeah. And you think about it seriously. The teams we're talking about, the Orioles have a nice, cozy stadium. The Phillies have a nice, cozy stadium. The Guardians, that is a nice stadium up there. It used to be Jacobs Field, and I can't remember who the name rights went to.
Progressive
Field. You're right. That's a nice little stadium up there close to the lake. The teams that have invested in the team atmosphere and in the surrounding community do a lot better, not only in drawing crowds, but eventually drawing decent players. Because I know that, players on the Orioles are happy to be there. Players on the Phillies are happy. The Phillies went from nobody wants to play there to now everybody wants to play there.
Yes.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I think there's just a whole culture, I want to say, that's coming up that's making baseball more approachable for both the players and the communities that they're in.
You've had that in places like St. Louis forever and a day.
Yeah.
It's sort of, even when the Cardinals are down, they're not down for very long. They figure it out pretty quickly. I've been to that ballpark. It's a beautiful place. People love the Cardinals. I mean, you know how deep that goes.
Yeah.
Even to a certain extent, there's such that great history with the Dodgers. And for the Giants, when they built that fabulous place up in San Francisco, the result, that and drafting Buster Posey made a difference too. Turned into, 3 World Series. And they're still kind of living off that, but they're coming back around again. And one of these days, that team will be back to where it was.
That's another one of the most beautiful ballparks in baseball. It's just gorgeous. And that big Coke bottle, you can't beat it, in left field.
And again, one doesn't think of to be honest with you, when people talk dynasties, the Giants don't pop into my mind, but they did. There was a stretch there in the early 2000s where they went to the World Series like every other year with some regularity.
2010, 2012, 2014.
Yeah. They picked up free agents this year, kind of toward the end, and they didn't get a lot of bargains, and I think that's coming to bite them in this part of the year.
And they've been beat up by injuries too, and they're still, the minor league system is not what it ought to be. They hung on to those glory days of the 2010s, which you understand. You hold on to some of those players maybe a little bit longer than you really should have, hoping that they could maybe capture lightning in a bottle, and they actually did in 2021. They were tremendous. Everybody had a great year, and then it all turned around the next year. Part of it was Buster Posey said, "Yeah, you know what? I am going to retire."
Yes,
and that made a gigantic difference. But they'll be back soon enough. They're smart. They know what they're doing, and I feel more confident about the future of the Giants than I do, say, the future of the Angels, which I'm not sure there actually is a future.
Oh, my goodness, the Angels, the poor Angels. I mean, we've all been Angels fans for years and years, and they've been victimized by luck, by stupidity, by bad trades, by everything you can be victimized by. And now you have Ohtani just down the highway now, smacking balls out of the ballpark. Meanwhile, Mike Trout is sitting around absorbing tens of millions of dollars for just being a pretty great guy. And he's probably not coming back this year. He's been hurt again. And they don't have much. They have a bunch of guys who want to play good.
A few years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And a few years ago, the owner of the Angels was looked upon as a genius because they had done such great deals and brought up such good players through the system. And that's all out the window now, right?
Yeah. The drafts from most of the 2010s, once they got done, after they drafted Mike Trout, it was as if they said, well, we don't really need to draft anybody else, do we? They were disasters. You look through every year and you just go, this is the best. Some of the best players that they drafted are now, playing for other teams, pitching for other teams. One of them pitches for the Baltimore Orioles. And it's so that there's been this churn of general managers, and then there was a churn of field managers. If Joe Madden couldn't make that work, nobody could make it work.
Right.
It goes all the way to the top with ownership. There are constant stories about neglect on the minor league system, scouts that aren't scouting like, Latin America, terrible choices constantly in the draft, and then a rash of injuries that's been shocking, the kind of stuff. And then there's all the ugly stuff too, like the death of Tyler Skaggs, which, uncovered a bunch of stuff that related to the front office that was just terrible and awful. And eventually Mike Trout was not going to be as durable as he had been in his younger days. And so he gets a couple of freak injuries, breaks his hand, hurts his knee. And at some point, Ohtani just said, this is enough for me. I've done I've served my time.
Back to baseball in a minute. But first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Nick Roman has been a fixture in Southern California radio news for more than 30 years. He is KPCC's host of All Things Considered.
His love of sports has led him to file numerous stories for NPR's Only a Game. And he is a longtime teacher of broadcast journalism to students at Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Fullerton.
To find out more about Nick, check out his page at laist.com/people/Nick-Roman. Or you can get in touch with him by email at nroman@scpr.org.
And now, back to the Musical Innertube, already in progress. Well, so I was counting this morning, and I think there's something like 14 teams that have a shot at getting a wild card.
Yep.
That is a testament to how the baseball system of postseason play is really a thing of beauty. It just suddenly everybody's excited, all sorts of cities. It's partly because you can play a bunch of games in a row, so you get these great series. You get the short series that are jam-packed and full of tense excitement because people can go out pretty fast. A good team can get beaten by a not so good team. The first team to win 3 out of the first 5 and you're gone, or 2 out of the first 3. It's so exciting, and it's very well designed. And 14 teams, that's a lot of excitement.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if it's still 14 in a couple of weeks. Teams will have to decide before the trading deadline whether they are real or whether they're, Memorex. And, if they decide that they're real, then they're going to make some deals and kind of and try and, beef up and get to where they've got to be. So I would expect that you might see, say, the Cardinals who are in that, maybe the Padres who've always been bold for trades. Perhaps, Tampa may have to make some decisions about whether they're in it or whether they're not. And then, it's some teams that will just say, okay, well, we're done for and we're doing something else. And that's the Toronto Blue Jays. I think they'll unload a bunch of guys. The few guys that the White Sox have, Garrett Crochet in particular, the pitcher, he's likely to go. And then also whatever small, change bottom of your pockets with the lint the Angels have, they'll trade that too. So I would expect to see like Tyler Anderson, who's a very good pitcher,
yes, he
likely
is.
to be traded, and Carlos Estevez, a relief pitcher, is likely going to get traded. So, after that, then you're going to really, that 14 probably gets cut down to a more reasonable number. And then you see who plays well and who, doesn't get hurt.
If you're sitting at the bottom of the standings, like the White Sox, like the Marlins, like the Colorado Rockies, and you're in a position to sell right now, I would think that you're in the catbird seat when these other teams come around looking for pitching help or infielders or outfielders, because you can take a player that's a fairly good pitcher or a fairly good outfielder and demand a pretty decent return in prospects to get those, in a way to build up your own minor league system.
It's yes and no on that. The Dodgers in 2018 cut a deal with the Orioles for Manny Machado, but they didn't give up. When you look at who actually made the trek back to Baltimore, none of them have turned out to be really significant players. Sometimes, that big player isn't the one that makes a difference. But I'll give you 2 other examples because I've looked these up and I remember them real well. In 2016, the Dodgers needed a relief pitcher, and so they made a trade with the Astros to get a guy named Josh Fields. It was a pretty good relief pitcher, and he, middle innings guy, and he did well for the Dodgers. They gave up a kid that they had signed, I think, out of Cuba, who really hadn't done very much. He'd only been with them for a few months. It was Yordan Alvarez. Who's like a big time slugger now for the Astros. The Pirates, the very next season, had a lefty named Tony Watson, a relief pitcher. And Dodgers, again, needed some relief help. So they traded a kid that they had just signed out of, the Caribbean, a guy named O'Neill Cruz, who is now the starting shortstop. So, you don't know if that's going to work out. Many, many years ago, that's what happened when the Braves got John Smoltz from the Tigers. And when the Astros got Jeff Bagwell from the Red Sox, deals that were, needed to make something immediate. Sometimes it works. Oftentimes, there's nothing to it. So it's a crapshoot, and you have to play it exactly right and know what you're doing. So we'll see if the Angels actually know what they're doing, or if Toronto actually knows what they're doing when they trade those big names that, you're right, Don, that really should get a return. Might not, though.
Yeah. two things that occur to me. That number one, those Astros, they were like written off for dead 4 weeks ago, and now they're only a game out. Part of that is because Seattle's been playing so crappy.
Yes.
Seattle, again, is another one of those yo-yo teams. They were a surprise to me at the first part of the season. They have excellent pitching. And, pitching usually wins ball games, but they don't. They don't have really any kind of offense to back up that pitching, unfortunately. And they could get overtaken by the Astros and even by the Texas Rangers in a few weeks.
Yes, who have woken up, haven't they? Yes, they have.
Yeah. Plus, the other thing is I keep harkening back when we talking about the Angels. A lot of the Angels are now ex-Phillies. We have the catcher
Logan O'Hoppe,
who was very good and was a really good minor league player for the Phillies, but they had JT Realmuto and he was standing in the way. One of our friends, Scott Lauber, who writes about the Phillies for the Philadelphia Inquirer, says was the perfect baseball trade. O'Hoppe for Brandon Marsh, who is now playing for the Phillies. He still can't hit left-handing pitcher to save his life, but he is a vital part of their whole thing. So, you never know when these trades go down, who winds up the winner and who winds up with somebody who's not quite on the winning side.
Yeah. Well, there was another trade that same season between the Angels and the Phillies where the Angels traded Noah Syndergaard.
Yes.
For Mickey Moniak. And
yes.
Neither really worked out.
No.
So you get that too, where he goes, well.
John and I were at the game that was Noah Syndergaard's debut with the Phillies. And, of course, they went all out. The big board had Thor and lightning and thunder, and he came out and he pitched and he won the game. And the reason he won the game because it went 5 innings and got rained out.
Yeah.
So it was an official game.
He was throwing slop. He was throwing garden variety poo-poo right up to that plate. It was really interesting to see how he reinvented himself.
I think the Phillies won that game something like, 6-5 or something like that. And it was only because Alec Boehm hit a home run in the 4th inning just before the rain came, and a 2-run home run, and managed to put the Phillies on top. But if they had left him in for any more innings, it would have been brutal.
Well, and that points up another thing. I mean, you remember when Noah Syndergaard really was Thor with the Mets, and when Matt Harvey really was the Dark Knight for the Mets, and when everybody talked about how good Jacob deGrom was for the Mets, and all three of them have been torn up by injuries and have had their careers. Syndergaard is. Last I heard, Syndergaard was going to do like a showcase before spring training next year to see if anybody wants to take him.
Yeah, well, the Dodgers had him for a while last year, right?
They did, yeah, and then they wised up and they traded him.
And DeGrom is out for the season. Am I correct?
I think he is. Yeah, I haven't looked to see where he is, but he hasn't been pitching. I know that much.
I know that Scherzer just came back for Texas, and said we're going all the way. Apparently, he looked pretty good in his first couple of games back, but he's only pitched 2 or 3 games by this point.
So I think this is one thing that we need to talk about before we let you go, and that is the 103-mile-an-hour pitch.
Oh, my God.
I think that you're seeing, little by little, a change of philosophy in baseball, both among the pitchers and among their managers. People are realizing that, you can throw the ball 105 miles an hour a couple of times, but if you do it all the time, it's going to shorten your career. And I think we've just talked about 3 real fireballing, 100-mile-an-hour pitchers who now are struggling. I think only one of them is still pitching, Matt Harvey. And they are, they were great in their prime, but you do not last. I mean, I think, who's the guy who's been pitching 100 miles an hour forever, for about 10 years? He's the outrider on this. He helped Chicago win the World Series years ago in 2016.
Chapman?
Chapman.
Yes, Arnoldus.
Right.
And, he still can get it up to 100 miles an hour. He's a little bit different. And also his career has not been lights out.
No.
He's had a funny little career where he gets bounced around a lot of times, and people go, "Well, you're okay, but goodbye." And I think people are beginning to realize that they got to be working on pitching rather than trying to get up to 109, 110. Because it's the human body. No matter how really, the human body is mortal. You may be a god, but your arm isn't.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that you look at someone like Tyler Anderson on the Angels, who doesn't throw all that hard, but he's been really good this season. A couple of years ago, he was really good for the Dodgers, made the All-Star team. There's still a world where if you're a lefty and you're just smart, you can live in it. They don't really offer that same thing to the righty who's smart, unless your name is Greg Maddux. And it's a shame because it is moving the game away, and it's also putting bodies at risk. I mean, you look at all those pitchers on the Dodgers who have been torn up by some sort of elbow problem, and it gets scary. You look at a kid like Hunter Green, who's on the Cincinnati Reds, who throws 100 miles an hour, and you look at Paul Skeens on the Pirates, who can do the same, and you just every time they throw, you sort of, let's run down to St. Timothy's and light a candle, because I don't know if that elbow can hang in there. Baseball has to figure something out. It's a philosophy thing and they've got to figure it out. And I'm not sure that obviously they haven't, because you just look at the injured lists and you can see just star after star after star, and it's frightening. It really is frightening. And then to think that there's sort of this myth that, well, if I get Tommy John surgery, I'm going to be okay. Yeah, go ask Noah Syndergaard. Go ask Walker Buehler, who's struggling through it right now.
It's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
It could be that the worst thing that ever happened was that Tommy John got Tommy John surgery and turned out to be great afterward. If he had been a bust, things would really change.
Yes. There are a couple of pitchers out there who have undergone Tommy John surgery twice.
Yeah.
And are still trying to do it.
Walker Buehler's one of them.
The other thing, I was watching the A's play the Phillies just before the All-Star game, and I saw Miller, who's the closer for the A's, and he was also in the All-Star game, and he's a guy who throws 100. And I'm sorry,
this team that you just mentioned, what is their name again? I'm not familiar with
Well,
that.
I would say the Oakland A's, but they're only Oakland for another couple of months, so you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
They'll be the something A's.
They're also known as the Oakland Guests.
Yeah, they'll be Sacramento, and then they'll be Las Vegas, and then maybe something else after that. You never know.
By the way, the Sacramento ballpark is quite nice. I've been there.
Is it really?
It is quite nice.
Right, I think they're going to love them in Sacramento. I think they're going to enjoy it.
I hope so.
I'm very surprised that they picked Vegas and didn't just say, hey, let's just go out to Sacramento, because I think you're right. I think there's a lot of fans out there, and they would have done fine. But who knows?
Well, the only thing we can all agree on is the Oakland Coliseum is one big, huge turd, and they're much better off out of it.
Yeah, well, the sad thing is that I think that's actually literally true.
The worst baseball stadium ever.
Ever. It's a stadium, baseball or otherwise. It's a terrible stadium.
It was ugly. It was bad for the players and the people who came to the game. You were way far away from the action, no matter what the sport was. I mean, it was terrible for football too. It was a naked obscenity. It was,
To Oakland's credit, they said, if you own a team in this city, you should build the stadium. We shouldn't have to help you. But on the other hand, Oakland knows what happens when you do that now.
Right.
That you lose every team that you have, and you're stuck with a huge turd sitting in the city that you're now going to have to raise and make into a parking lot or a duplex, something. But to go back to Miller, who's the closer, he's throwing 100, and it brought back memories to me of Chapman. You couldn't hit him for the first year or two because he was throwing 100. However, he wasn't pitching, he was throwing.
Yeah.
And after a while, professional baseball hitters can hit 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so when you get into throwing instead of pitching, after a couple of years, even if you're only throwing 1 or 2 innings a game, they catch up with you and they say, okay, I'm
Yes.
sitting on that fastball. And when it comes and it's 100 miles an hour, I'll whack it. And I think that's what happened to Chapman. And then that might be what happens to Miller or any of those others that throw 100 and don't worry about pitching. Because I think some of the really good pitching staffs now, like the one in Seattle, like the one that the Phillies have, and the one that Milwaukee has, are pitching. And the Red Sox,
Yes.
they have pitchers as well, guys who place the ball where they want it. And they can get up to 95 if they want to, but mostly they're throwing and pitching to contact and throwing the ball where they want to instead of just heaving it up there and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I agree.
I might mention that Arnoldus Chapman blew 2 straight American League championships for the Yankees with a well-placed fastball to the same batter, to the little guy on Houston,
Altuve.
And just grooved it about 99. Altuve said, "Let me get my knife and fork. This is Thanksgiving," and he just, and you're right. It's these guys can hit 100-mile-an-hour, pitch. I mean, it seems impossible, but they really can. They really can.
Yep. So, Nick, where do you think we're going as we're heading into the second half? Who do you think stays on top of the water? Who do you think sinks?
Dodgers and Phillies. I'm real confident about that. Obviously they're going to have to, fist fight their way through a 5-game, best of 5 series early on. And, you hope you don't catch somebody who's hot. And that's happened to both of them in recent years. So they're familiar with it. On the American League side, I mean, you got to go with the Orioles because, they're just that good. And I think the Cleveland Guardians because they are that good and nobody knows it, but they are that good. And then in the World Series, I don't know because I don't know what happened. It's sort of useless to predict. I'm okay with any of those teams. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge Dodger fan, so they're my favorites. But if any of those teams win, I would be able to look at it and go, yeah, that makes sense because all those teams are that good.
John, what do you think?
I think it's going to be Cleveland versus St. Louis.
Ooh.
And I said that only because it's an utter nightmare for all of the TV executives who are going to try to sell ads. I know that's not going to happen. So I would say, first of all, I want the Phillies very much. It's hard for me to say that because I love the Dodgers too. We all grew up in Orange County and Los Angeles County, all of us, and we love the Dodgers. It's hard though because, man, I would love to see Phillies Orioles. Man, would I love to see that World Series.
That'd be something.
Yep.
The ball be flying. Great. Yeah.
That would be great. The Orioles have run into problems lately. I'm looking for them at the trading deadline to get pitching. If they get pitching, I think they're in it because they're using a lot of kids from the farm system who come up and pitch pretty well for a couple innings and then get their clocks cleaned. So I think probably they need to get some pitching help, and if they do, I think they'll manage to hold off the Yankees. The Yankees, I think, don't have pitching. I think Gill's okay, but he's not going to shoulder the burden. I think Judge and Soto are good, but I don't think they can carry the team if they go into any kind of slump that nobody else picks up the slack for them. I think Cleveland is interesting. God, I wish the Chicago Cubs were better, but I don't think they're going to matter. And I'm going to say this right now. I would hate it if St. Louis got in there because for years and years when the Phillies were pretty good, St. Louis would catch fire at the end of the year and lap everybody and get into the World Series. Yeah. I'm thinking specifically when the Phillies had 102 games and they had a great pitching staff and Ryan Howard blew out his Achilles on the last play of the game when the Cardinals went into the World Series after that. Now, having said that, that's kind of what the Phillies did when they got into the World Series against the Astros a couple of years ago. They got fire at the very end and managed to beat everybody in the postseason. So I kind of had to retract that a little bit, but I'll go back to it now. I don't want St. Louis in there at all. So I think Phillies and Orioles would be outstanding. I think Dodgers and Yankees would be an interesting one.
Oh my goodness!
And I think
Everybody
Cleveland
wants.
in there.
That's the one everybody's talking about is a replay of the 1981 series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also would like to see Houston back off a little bit. They've had their run for the last few years, and it's enough. I think they can let somebody else come up.
I have no love for Houston.
I don't really either, and I'm afraid it's going to be a Houston Arizona World Series. Arizona looks like is a dark horse, and they're getting hot now, and they have a lot of good players. You know what I mean? They're one of these. They popped our bubble last year, and they can do it. They've got the players. So anyway, this is why baseball exists, is for old farts like us to sit around and dream about it. It's great. Thank you for coming on, Nick Roman. We always love hanging out with you.
I had a great time, talking baseball. This is not a very hard thing for me to do at all. If you guys would just, if we had hot dogs and peanuts and beer, then it would really make it terrific. I mean, it was good as it is, but that would make it just perfect.
Okay, so next time, everybody come loaded down with food. It'll be kind of difficult to hear what we're saying when we're eating, but I agree with you. I think hot dogs and beer are worth it. Thanks, Nick.
Sure thing.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.